Today, I'll be sharing a client story of a couple at age 60 with $2 million in savings and figuring out how much they can spend in retirement. In over 15 years of helping people navigate retirement planning with varying levels of savings, I've developed specific methods to determine optimal spending levels that balance lifestyle goals with portfolio longevity. If you're new to the channel, my name's Justin. I own a financial planning firm in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, where we help retirees all across the country make smarter financial decisions and help them narrow down retirement spending. That's exactly why I'm making today's video. I want to show you how much you can safely spend with $2 million at about age 60 and ensure your money lasts throughout retirement and that you get to purposefully enjoy it, which is the whole point. So let's dig right into it. And today we're going to talk about Heather and Andy, both age 60, who've built up about $2 million being disciplined with investing throughout their careers. And they were always great savers, but like many couples in their early 60s, they're unsure of what $2 million actually means in lifestyle terms. Can they safely spend $60,000 a year? Is it $100,000? Is it more than that? How do they keep from spending too much? What if they want to make a big purchase? Is that going to throw everything off and reduce their potential spending in future years? What about taxes? What about inflation? What about, Justin, I've heard of this IRMA thing where I could have to pay more in Medicare premiums. How does that all work? All those questions they had. They've heard of generic withdrawal rules like the 4% rule. They've run some calculators, but it all feels generic. It doesn't really give them a clear answer. What they really want to know is simple. If we retire now, how much can we comfortably spend each year and still feel confident that our money will last? And how can we purposefully spend the money to add value to our life? How can we intentionally enjoy all of the money we spent our entire life saving? They don't want to die the richest people in the cemetery. They want to be able to enjoy the money. And the key problem here is Heather and Andy, they don't want to make a mistake that depletes their assets too fast, causes a lot of anxiety. They also don't want to keep wasting their healthiest, most active years working longer than they need to. And more importantly, they don't want to get to age 80 or age 85 and still have millions and realize they never got to do the things that they wanted to do because they underspent out of fear. And their challenge isn't that they don't have enough, it's that they don't have a system to turn their savings into reliable inflation-adjusted income while keeping taxes, healthcare, market risk under control. And now if you feel like you're in a similar situation to Heather and Andy, where you have a lot of money saved up, but you're not sure exactly what your spending capabilities are, click on the link in the description below the video. There'll be a quick questionnaire. Fill it out. I'll send you back a personalized video giving you my thoughts on your retirement, some steps that you can take to possibly improve. And here's the impact that this was having on Heather and Andy. So they were caught in what I call retirement limbo. They'd say things like, well, let's just wait one more year. Even though their investments could already support them, they weren't missing money. They were missing confidence. So building up more savings was not going to fix that problem. And once we were able to model this out for them, though, after we asked them a series of key questions, which I'll go through here in a second, a lot of that anxiety faded. They finally understood what their portfolio could realistically support and what levers they could adjust if markets or life changed. And now that we've talked a little bit about what was impacting them, the next piece is really important because I'm going to break down how much they can spend in retirement, the numbers we walk through, and how you can implement some of this advice potentially into your own situation. So the first step in narrowing things down here is answering some key questions because personalizing this is everything. There have been numerous studies done on retirement withdrawals, numerous papers I could reference, but one thing that stood out to me in particular is that after looking at lots and lots of studies on this, basically Nobel laureate William Sharpe summed this all up by saying that figuring out how to decumulate in retirement is the nastiest, hardest problem in finance because there's just so many variables. And the consensus on all the literature basically states that there is no solution that is appropriate for everyone, and neither is there a single solution for any individual. And I can say from experience that that's definitely true. I know a lot of people, especially you may be watching this video and want a simple solution to the question, but there's no simple solution to be given because there are just so many factors that go into it. So here are some of the questions that separate guesses from an actual plan, and these come from years of experience from sitting across a table or across the screen via Zoom, whatever it happens to be, with couples just like Heather and Andy. So here's what we want to know. Number one is, what is the real spending target and what is actually optional? We want to be able to segregate those, because if we need to make an adjustment, that's important. And then what is the income floor that you need to feel calm? What is that number of base expenses every month that you have to meet no matter what? Is that $2,500? Is it $3,500? We need to know that number. How comfortable are you with small or even large spending adjustments? How much flexibility is there? That's going to be very key. Which tax bracket are we willing to own on purpose? Meaning, we want the goal of the plan to be for you to enjoy your life. If we can save taxes along the way, that's great. If we have to choose between one or the other, we want you to enjoy your life and spend your money. But we also still want to keep the tax plan as front of mind and see where we can save and see where we can mitigate. So we want to intentionally plan for that. The next thing is, when do you want to spend the most and why? Because a lot of retirees want to front load those early retirement years. They're often called the go-go years. So when you want to spend the money is key, and we'll touch on that here in a second. How will you handle the first scary market drop is critical. We want to script that out, set those expectations, and then how will you also handle the psychological shift from accumulating to decumulating? That is a big one. We may not be able to totally eliminate that anxiety, but I find education and having a set plan helps mitigate this a lot. And the last part is, what does enough look like for you? This is not a spreadsheet answer. This is a values answer. This is a you answer. So once you define enough, you can stop chasing a number, start living the plan that you actually earned. And so once we establish that context, we have the answers to those questions. Now let's look at some of the numbers, and we'll walk through some of the software and show you some of the decision-making process here. Let's take a look at some of the baseline assumptions here to see where we're starting with Heather and Andy. So I had shown previously, I mentioned that they have about $2 million, mostly in 401ks, and they do have a non-retirement account, which will come in handy. They have about $60,000 in emergency funds, and they have their home, which is fortunately paid off, which is nice to not have that as an obstacle in retirement. So let's look at the whole retirement dashboard, where we can make a lot of adjustments and do some of the fun stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to project out their plan until age 90. And you might think, hey, I'm not going to live that long, but we want to make sure that longevity is never an issue. Sometimes I run these to 95. We can always adjust this to age, to realistic life expectancy, 84, 86 if we want to, but let's just go with 90. They want to spend about $6,000 a month, and plus healthcare. We're going to add healthcare to that. We're going to assume that that's inflation adjusted every year. Regular spending and expenses, 2.5%. Healthcare inflation, we're going to put at 5% because that's historically the rise in healthcare costs. We're going to assume they take Social Security at full retirement age, and we're going to assume that they're invested in a 70-30 mix in retirement, 70% stock, 30% bond or secure type. And we'll touch on that more here in a second. And we're going to assume they're making inflation-adjusted withdrawals every year, meaning they're going to increase the amount they're taking every year with inflation, no matter what. And so if we map that out, we'll come back to the Monte Carlo score here in a second. What I want to do is I want to look at actual numbers. Charts and Monte Carlos are great, but I want to see how the numbers play out. I want to see the details. So what the software is showing is 2026 will be their first full year of retirement. Obviously, they have no income because they're retired. Expenses is about $85,000 because we have $6,000 a month for living expense, plus healthcare, which we're deliberately overshooting a little bit. We could probably manage that and get that lower, but I'd rather overshoot it than undershoot it, and we're going to increase that throughout retirement. And then they have some travel goals that they want to do. So we have travel here for the next 7 years, their go-go years. They have their bucket list. They want to go to Europe, Egypt, all those cool places. Egypt would be nice to see. I haven't seen the pyramids yet. That's on my bucket list too. So we're going to put that in for 7 years. So their total expenses for the first year is going to be about $104,000, where we can see in this net flows tab. This tells us, okay, they're going to need to take $104,000 from somewhere. So now what does this actually look like though? I'll show the withdrawal rates percentages here in a second, but if we add up their investment balance, we subtract what they're going to take out with net cash flow. So anything in parentheses is a withdrawal or a decline. So this number is increasing with inflation. for a few years until they hit Social Security age. So now their Social Security kicks on at around their first full year of Social Security is year 2033. So now notice they don't have to withdraw as much. What I'm also doing is I'm simulating portfolio returns to be a little bit more realistic. I don't like to run those straight average linear return projections because that's not how real life returns work. They come in random fashion and there's negative years in there. So what I'm doing is running this market drop scenario starting at 2001 based off this 70-30 mix. So they have 2 bad years in a row. And in reality, we actually might make adjustments at that time. Maybe we do though, maybe we don't. Just depends on what's going on at the time. But I'm just going to run the numbers as if we didn't so you can see how the plan holds up. And then returns get back on track, started coming back up again. Then we have a 2008 year here. That's exactly what this is showing. And then we're just going to assume that we keep the same spending levels, that there is no adjustments because I want you to see the balance at the end. Returns get back on track, obviously all over the place. There's still negative returns in there. Now their withdrawals at age 75 are required minimum distributions. So we're assuming we didn't do any like Roth conversion strategies, anything like that. That'll be a video for another time. But let's just assume that they're taking required minimum distributions, $83,000 a year and going up. And we're assuming that they're spending all this money, which we hope they are, that they're getting enjoyment out of it. That's what it's for. And so we just follow that. So let's go down till they hit 89, 90. Well, they still have, hypothetically, of course, we don't know what investment returns are going to be, but if we assume these numbers, they still have a 1.8 million at retirement, and they're still taking, they're taking 173,000 a year, for example, at age 86 in required distributions. So what does that tell us? That tells us that their goal is likely sustainable, at least given past market returns. But there's also a lot more room to spend more, obviously. And of course, in years where we have big drops like this, we will likely modify the spending. And now they're not spending that much in this year, but let's say we did have 2 negative years in a row. We want to have a buffer there or a plan where we can adapt and say, do we need to change spending? Is that going to affect your whole plan or ruin the rest of the plan? So now let's go back and see where the room is though. So now the question becomes, okay, well, how much can they actually stretch this and can they spend a lot more? Well, the score is telling us that, yeah, they can, because you don't actually want a 100% Monte Carlo score. It runs 1,000 trials, good markets, bad markets, everything in between, and says, if Heather and Andy spend $6,000 a month plus healthcare and increase that with inflation all the way up until age 90 and never deviate, they essentially have a 99% chance of being able to do that and still having money in their accounts in some form at age 90. But as you can see from the numbers, that means they're probably still going to have a lot left over. And if they want to have that there intentionally, that's great. But we don't want them to get there and say, oh, we could have spent more money. We still have 1.8 million left. So let's bump up the bounds here. Let's go to 8,000 a month. Let's see what happens. Okay, it's going to drop to 80. And so to me, an 80% score is a lot more appropriate, I think, and gives more probability of being able to thoroughly enjoy the money. So if we go back to the numbers, let's go back and take a look at that real quick. Let's go back to the invested assets. So now, as you can see, spending is a lot higher, of course. So now they're spending a lot more than they were previous. And now they actually get down to almost none at the end. And we're throwing some long-term care costs in here as well, which may or may not happen. Again, a lot of variables here, right? So there's a lot of things to try to take into account. However, most people may not feel comfortable, at age 89, having only, 584,000 left. So this all needs to be adjusted year by year. And again, that's the whole key. When do adjustments need to be made? That's where some of the detailed planning, personalized planning comes in. And that's what we'd be looking at from year to year. But it does give some comfort in looking at the numbers and saying, okay, if we did make these types of spending goals and we stuck to this and we had these hypothetical returns, could we make it? It gives us a basis to start planning and making adjustments from. And now if we want to look at some of the withdrawal details, this is what I like to look at. So I like to look at a breakdown and see, okay, where's the income coming from? So that we can see from the orange, it's coming from savings. Then the blue is Social Security, and we can see the breakdown. And more importantly, I want to look at the withdrawal rate. So in the beginning, especially if we're doing this higher spending scenario, withdrawal rates are pretty high at the beginning, especially considering that there were 2 bad years in a row, right? So withdrawal rates are high, but then they come back down to a much more manageable level because Social Security kicks in. So that's something that has to be planned. So it's really difficult to just assume a 4 or 5% flat rate throughout retirement. That's not how it goes in reality. Usually it goes in stages, more spending early on, and then depending on when Social Security kicks in, takes the pressure off the portfolio, and then it gives it room to breathe a little bit. And if we go back to our original scenario, and let's go back to 6,000, and we'll see how that makes an impact. So then obviously the withdrawal rates are lower, of course, because we're taking less. When Social Security kicks on, they're not really spending a whole lot, which is why I proposed a change in the first place, that we stretch some of the spending. And so one important thing though is I'm going to go back to the 8,000 and refresh it. Let's go to our probability. So we have a 70-30 mix here, which was appropriate for them. And here's why. A lot of times retirees might default to being too conservative, but here's something that you have to be aware of. Let's say Heather and Andy said, well, we heard that once we hit retirement, we have to be super duper conservative. We don't want to lose any of the money we have. Well, let's put it all in, fixed annuities, CDs, stuff like that. We don't want to take any risk. Well, let's see what that actually does to their plan. So if they do that, and we're assuming like a 3 to 4% rate, well, they go to almost no probability of having money at the end, because obviously they're just not getting the growth that they need for the next 25, 30, 35 years. So it's very important that we make sure there's enough growth there. In fact, let's go with 80% stock, 20% bonds. Let's see what that does to the plan. Remember, we had 80% here before at a 70-30. Now it goes up to 84%, which makes sense. Obviously, the more stock exposure you have or equity exposure, the more hypothetical growth that you'll have in the portfolio, the more room you have to spend. And there's a lot of research on this that I've shared in other videos. But determining the right mix that's appropriate for you, it depends on a lot of factors as well. Obviously, your psychological makeup. If you can't handle market swings and you're just going to be tossing and turning all night, there's different trade-offs that are going to have to be made, which goes back to the quote I made a few minutes ago, that this is one of the hardest problems in finance because it's so personal. And so now that we've walked through this with Heather and Andy, hopefully this has shed some light on what's appropriate to withdraw in retirement, how far you can potentially stretch it, and the importance of making adjustments. That's the whole key. In reality, what we're going to be doing with Heather and Andy is adjusting this year by year, figuring out, okay, where are we at this year? What's life like? What's changed? How much do we want to spend? Is that still sustainable? And then constantly adjusting it. That's the whole key to everything. And now that you've seen what $2 million can provide for someone retiring at around age 60, you can better understand the substantial spending flexibility that comes with disciplined retirement savings and strategic planning. If you need help optimizing your retirement strategy, there'll be a link in the description below the video. Fill out a quick questionnaire. I will send you back a personalized video giving you my thoughts on your retirement, some steps that you can take to possibly make it better. If I can help, just let me know. Thanks again, as always, for watching, and I will see you in the next one.